Benjamin Franklin, Leonardo da Vinci, Tesla, Einstein. I've spent years of my life studying the most successful self-taught minds in history, reading everything I can get my hands on. But behind every one of those epic figures is a single forgotten habit. These people made knowledge physical. They put ideas into notebooks, diagrams, rooms that they used as memory palaces, symbols that they injected their ideas in, and other systems that allowed them to return to their ideas in physical form. And speaking of making ideas physical, let's take things to the next level, like I did earlier today at the beach. Centuries before Da Vinci filled his notebooks, before Benjamin Franklin built his self-improvement system, and before Einstein turned thought experiments into mental laboratories, one vain, brilliant poet showed the world an even stronger mental habit you'll learn today. I'm talking about Simonides of Ceos, a man who was neither saint nor scientist. And to understand his life and learning habits better, I went down to the beach to see if I could carve his name into stone. I needed to feel the resistance of the world against the fragility of a name, because as you'll see, friction isn't just a physical force. For Simonides, friction was the ink that made memory permanent. He didn't just remember things, he engraved them onto the geography of his mind and his soul. And as you'll see, friction is one of the learning secrets of all the greatest minds of history. Indeed, it's friction that helped Simonides discover an epic learning habit and tool that, thanks to him being the sole survivor of a horrific disaster, remains with us to this day. But before Simonides escaped that disaster and founded this incredible learning habit and tool, back in the 5th century, Simonides was much more than just a legendary poet. He's a person who's worth your time because he was one of the world's first intellectual mercenaries. And that attitude and that spirit is going to be very, very useful for you. And the details that I've unearthed are so essential to lifelong learners, because Simonides was really the first person to realize and practice information as a kind of currency. He charged a premium for his poetry writing and his performances from memory. And he was able to do that because he thought about doing it in the first place, and he had a mental operating system that made him functionally superior to everyone else in the room. He was so good with his words and his memory that people called him honey-tongued Simonides. He wrote victory odes, elegies, and even carved epitaphs in stone. He was, by all accounts, innovative and brilliant. Brilliant, but hardly modest. And that's part of what makes Simonides of Ceos so interesting. Anne Carson tells us in her book, Economy of the Unlost, that at 80 years old, Simonides wrote, "As to memory, I say nobody can equal Simonides." Well, that's not humility, is it? That's an 80-year-old man who's been the best at something for decades, and he wants you to know it. He wants all of history to know it. He could memorize any poem of any length and any amount of names at any party he attended. But he wasn't concerned just about memorizing things. He was interested in helping other people make their names immortal too. Carson argues that Simonides was the first person in history to suggest that artists sign their works. Think about that. If this is true, before Simonides, a poem, a sculpture, a piece of art, architecture, it just existed. It belonged to everyone and no one. But Simonides said, no, put your name on it. Let people remember who made this. He was obsessed with making sure things weren't lost. Names, identities, and the credit due for the work that got done. And that obsession requires a willingness to accept friction in your life. And it's also what set up everything that happened next. You see, during the 6th century BCE, Simonides was hired by a very wealthy man named Scopus to give a speech and recite poetry at a banquet. This was a big building filled with important guests. And Simonides did his job, and he did it well. He recited his poems beautifully. And at the end of his performance, he thanked two figures from mythology named Castor and Pollux. Now, this is not a throwaway detail, so don't skip past it. Castor and Pollux were twin heroes, boxers, and Zeus had granted them immortality. They represent the idea that we, as mere humans, have the chance to endure beyond death. Simonides chose to honor them, but Scopus did not like that. He wanted praise directed to Scopus. He was the one paying for the event, after all, and paying Simonides in order to give his poetry at this event. But when Simonides came to collect his fee, Scopus told him, "Why don't you go ask Castor and Pollux to pay you if you think they're so worthy of praise?" Now think about the timing here. At that exact moment, a servant walks in and tells Simonides that two men are outside asking for him. Simonides tells Scopus, "I'll get back to the matter of my fee in a moment," and walks outside of the banquet hall. Some distance away, he finds two men on horseback, and they beckon him closer. "Closer, please." And as Simonides approaches, he recognizes the two men. It's Castor and Pollux themselves. And then, without warning, the building behind Simonides collapses, and everybody at that banquet hall is killed, including Scopus. The bodies were mangled beyond recognition, except Simonides had a learning habit that enabled him to help the families tell who was who. And even as a vain, greedy, and brilliant poet who'd just been arguing about money 5 minutes earlier, he walked back to the rubble and he helped the authorities identify every single victim. And he could do it because of his habit of observation and using his memory. But here's what I want you to really notice. Observation so that he could use his memory to notice where each person was sitting and encode them in his mind using the banquet hall itself as a mnemonic device. But he had to notice first. He had to pay attention. And then he had to develop the location as a memory palace before he tried to remember a thing. And as a result, he gave those families their dead back and enabled them to have proper burials. And in ancient Greek culture, that wasn't just important. It was sacred. It was everything. Without proper burial, there was no closure, no peace for the living or for the dead. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just read Antigone by Sophocles. It's the third in the Oedipus cycle, and it is such a great play, and it will help you understand just how important burying the dead was for Greek culture. And it underscores the importance and the humility in this vain poet to actually take the time to help out in this way without asking for a dime. And this story of Simonides going and showing where all the victims were in that banquet hall, that's the origin of every memory technique you've ever heard of, at least in the Western tradition. And I'm talking about the memory palace and the method of loci. And this is everything Sherlock Holmes fans will call a mind palace. All of it traces back to this one moment. But here's what Da Vinci and Tesla understood that you can't afford to miss. Simonides didn't do this just to be helpful. He did it because his habits made him so effective as a top performer he couldn't stop himself. And as a result, Simonides has never been forgotten. While everyone else at that banquet hall was just eating and gossiping, or like Scopus, being so caught in their vanity that they couldn't allow Simonides to thank Castor and Pollux, Simonides was using the area to map a memory palace and then performing a high cognitive audit of the room in real time, memorizing the names and the location of each person. This kind of behavior is exactly what makes figures like Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin so interesting and effective as well. They weren't just smart. They were processing the physical world at a higher level than the people around them because they were observing and they were prepared to capture the information. And you can see what I'm talking about in my previous videos about Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson. When the roof fell in the Simonides story, he was the one who was alive to the data. So if you want genius results, you have to stop viewing memory techniques as tricks for exams. You need to start viewing mnemonic training as survival level competitive advantage. If you want to build your survival advantage and you're new here, get subscribed, because this channel is all about helping everybody get better so it raises all ships for the entire planet. And for the love of memory, help the robots never forget that we humans still care about human information, and you will not miss what's coming up about this guy and some of the weird and wonderful and wacky things he did with his mind and memory. So thanks for that. And think about the last conversation you had where you forgot someone's name 30 seconds after they told it to you, or the meeting where you couldn't recall the key thing that your colleague said yesterday. Those aren't just memory failures. Part of following this channel is helping make sure that you seize those moments and show up to the people in your life, because that never happens to you. And the sharper your memory, the more present you become. And being present, actually paying attention to the room you're in and the people you're with, is the most valuable thing you can offer anyone. Your family, your colleagues, your patients, your students, your community, whoever you meet. Simonides was not just the founder of this technique that lets you do that. He was the person who showed that memory is an act of care, and he was so trained he could not stop himself from doing it. And this idea goes even deeper than the Banquet story, because there's a second story about Simonides that almost nobody knows, and it's part of what inspired me to get down to the beach and carve Simonides' name in stone. And it goes like this. One day, Simonides was on his way to catch a ship. He was traveling to work on writing epic poems, praise that he was going to write down and memorize and recite all about the great achievers of his time. Probably not Scopus, though. He wasn't going to praise Scopus, apparently. But that's what he did. He turned people into legends and then carved those legends into stone. And on his way to the harbor, he came across a dead body. Now, I guess back then you didn't play detective and try to figure out why the poor fellow you found on the side of the road died. But Simonides did something that tells you everything about who he was at his core. He stopped. He gave the man a proper burial, because burial was very important in ancient Greece, and then he carved an epitaph into stone with his hands, and that epitaph was, "I pray those who killed me get the same themselves. O Zeus, of guest and host, I pray those who put me in the ground enjoy the profit of life." Enjoy the profit of life. Now, again, I wanted to know what it felt like to carve something into stone. Not just the idea, but the physical resistance of blunt physical reality, and tools that I had around the house to just work on what that would be like to be like Simonides. So I went down to the beach, wasn't a boat around, and I don't think there's any shipwreck happening, but I scratched Simonides on one side of this stone and Ceos on the other. And I have to tell you, when you're fighting the grain of the rock just to make a single letter, you realize why Simonides valued memory so much. If you're going to go through the labor of carving a name into the earth, into stone, you make damn sure that name is worth remembering. And it changes your relationship with the words. And it shows you what friction can do for you. Because now that I've done this is a much more permanent act of memory. I can throw this stone away and I'm going to remember what I did because of the friction. And ease, as we know, is the enemy of memory. In a world where so many people want information to be frictionless, ease actually leads us into forgetfulness. But Simonides teaches us that the harder the carving process, the more immortal the thought. The mark says, this person was here, and the person who did the marking, they are going to hold that information and prevent it from vanishing. So think again about that line. Enjoy the profit of life. This is exactly the world Simonides lived in, a world where information remains valuable because embracing fiction makes it nearly impossible for valuable things to vanish from the mind. And that's what an epitaph is. It's something that makes it hard for the dead to vanish from the mind. And that's what the memory palace technique does. And that's why the story of Simonides of Ceos is so important. He made sure the names of the dead were connected to the right bodies so the right bodies could get buried, giving peace to the families. And that helped him continue to enjoy the profit of life until a very old age. But of course, he had to survive that shipwreck first. So here's what happened. Later that night, after carving the epitaph into stone, the ghost of the dead man appeared to Simonides in a dream. "Don't get on that ship," the ghost said, as if to say thanks for ensuring that the dead man's name would remain in memory. The next morning, Simonides warned his fellow travelers, but they didn't listen. Simonides, on the other hand, he obeyed the dream, and the ship sank. Everyone on board died. A dead man, properly buried, saved the life of the man who buried him. Now, see if you can hold both stories in your mind, the banquet hall, the shipwreck, and notice what connects them. In both cases, Simonides survived because he paid attention to the physical world. At the banquet, he noticed where people were sitting, and that physical awareness let him identify the dead later. On the road, he noticed a body, stopped, interacted with it physically, carved stone, moved earth, and that act of physical engagement saved his life. This is not a man who lived in abstraction. This is a man who understood that knowledge has to be embodied. It has to be placed somewhere. It has to be written down, carved into something real in order to make it real. Now, obviously, I can't go down to the beach and find stones and use carving tools all the time when we have modern tools like notebooks and big old drawing pads like this for mind mapping. No. I keep coming back to what Tony Buzan called radiant thinking, the kind of thinking that happens when your hand is moving on paper, when ideas have physical location, and ways that allow your brain to remember where something is on a page, because that page where your notes are taken or your mind maps are made is in physical space. And this connects us back directly to people like Da Vinci with his notebooks, and Tesla with his diagrams, and Feynman with his blackboards. The common habit has always been the same. Make knowledge physical. Use your hands to help your brain give it a location so your eyes can see the location that you created in combination with the information. You've put the information somewhere but produced it, and that's what helps you find it. And I want to come back to Anne Carson because she says something about Simonides that I think is the single most important insight about memory anyone has ever written. And that's no exaggeration. I'm not exaggerating, I promise. Carson said that the room becomes his theater of memory. Simonides ate dinner amidst the data. Wow. The data. He ate dinner amidst the data. That changed how I think about many things that I do, because that's what memory, when it's trained, actually is. It's a way of being in the world where you're present, noticing, receiving, and letting information not just pass through you, but become you. And Simonides, well, Carson wrote, she said that memory with Simonides is born as both commodity and gift, both wage and grace. Simonides charged for his poetry. He made it a commodity. But when the building collapsed, he gave his memory away for free, as a gift, as grace. The wage that Scopus refused to pay, well, the grace was that Simonides also gave the family of Scopus the information about where he was in the rubble. And that tension between the mercenary intellectual and the man who used his gift to serve is what makes Simonides so extraordinary. He's human. He's not a saint. He's a complicated, ambitious, vain man who, when it mattered most, used the best thing about himself for other people. If Carson gives you the soul of Simonides, Francis Yates gives you the legacy. In The Art of Memory, Yates traces how the memory technique Simonides demonstrated, which involves noticing locations, placing information in space, how that traveled from ancient Greece through Rome, through the medieval monasteries, through the Renaissance, all the way to the present moment. Now, I know I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating, and Yates notices it too. The first step Simonides took was not to memorize the guests. It was to imprint the location itself in his mind. The room came first. The memory palace technique was established, and then the information was there. You want to do that yourself. Develop the container before you need to memorize the content. This principle has been the foundation of trained memory for centuries, and it's the principle I teach in everything I do, including the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. Every Roman orator who memorized a speech used this principle. Every medieval monk who memorized scripture used this principle. Giordano Bruno, who we talked about in the previous video, he made it the basis of the memory wheel technique. And it is so extraordinary if you build the container first and prepare yourself with the techniques so that you're able to take action. Tim's sent me an image of one of his memory wheels that he made after watching the previous video and talked about in his email how it helped him accelerate his practice. That's action. And whatever your goal is, passing an exam, learning a language, mastering a professional skill, it will all be helped by creating these mental containers first so that you can fill them. So my question for you is, what are you memorizing? And when I think about what to memorize next, I keep coming back to that line from the Epitaph, enjoy the profit of life. Now, to do that myself, I've recently qualified and started law school. And I continue developing my knowledge of languages like German, Sanskrit, Mandarin, and Latin, but especially Latin now that I'm in law school. I mean, void ab initio. I was able to memorize this really quickly, void from the beginning. And I also have to memorize names. You know, Dairy versus Peak, 1889. Now, this is as simple as using a Dairy Queen restaurant that I went to with my grandma as a kid and thinking about Stephen King's It, which I believe takes place in Derry, along with Kim Peek, who, you know, Dairy versus Peak. And then 1889, I have a 00 to 99 PAO system. And these are all skills you can learn in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, where then if you have Cobra Commander, for example, for 89, then you can link it together with these other images and remember the names of precedents and cases. So if you're watching and you're thinking, how can I, like Simonides, remember rooms full of names, or just quickly come up with associations for Dairy versus Peak or void ab initio? Well, what you want to do is make sure that you understand this principle. Build the container first and then fill it. To help you, I have a video on my YouTube channel called The Memory Palace Technique for Studying. It walks you through the process step by step. I encourage you to watch it. It's all about everything Simonides demonstrated at that banquet, broken down into a system you can start practicing today. And if you want to go even deeper, make sure to follow the link in the description or on the screen to get training that thousands of students have gone through, and it's helped them go from I understand the concept of the container before the content to practicing that principle daily. So that's in the description on the screen, or just go to magneticmerrymethod.com/YT. Remember, if Simonides can be a human, greedy, vain, complicated, and brilliant, well, you too can be brilliant no matter what human elements you have. And, you know, you may never get saved by a ghost, but by paying attention, you will see opportunities to help others. And that is going to bring you even closer to the great memory tradition, because you've gone beyond just memorizing for exams. You've made it now part of serving other people. Yes, you can pass exams, but also more. Yes, you can learn new languages, but also more. Yes, you can remember the names of the people who you meet, but also more. And when you push past those goals, you won't have just a better memory. You'll enjoy the profit of life. You may even become the stuff of legend, just like Simonides himself. So if you want to follow more of my adventures in learning, including now at least one trimester in law school, again, make sure to smash that thumbs up for the love of memory and learning, get subscribed, and check out the Memory Palace Technique for studying next, so you can memorize along with me. Come visit me at magneticmarymethod.com. Thanks again, and until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.